into what I will hopefully discuss as well. So we shall go from there. And I think a big philosophy of mine is, and what we tend to find a lot within Europe and the UK, is that the coach and the support staff around it are trying to make each individual athlete at the center of this cycle, whereby it includes your technical, your physical, your video analysis, your medical staff. And that's where something like we call it SPARK, so sports science, performance analysis, research, and coaching. Because ultimately we want to keep trying to get better. And to help us with this, we want to make sure that our players are at the top level. Now, that might be any one of these kind of examples here, but we want to make sure that they're doing the best. And there has been a lot of research and different models done in order to examine the dose-response relationship. And over the years, there has been different types of models produced, and this is one of the more recent ones where we start to look as well at the mechanical loads and understanding how and why things are starting to work. And it's something that I always take into each of the clubs I've worked with over the last 14 to 15 years. How can we help enhance performance, reduce injury risk? I will never use the term injury prevention. And the reason why, we can't prevent injuries. We can reduce their risk. If you can prevent injuries, you should be billionaire, okay? And we are here to try and manage and reduce that risk of injury to our players. Now, when we look at research and we look at what has actually tried to help inform us over this period of time, we can see that looking at training load studies, time motion analysis, GPS, camera systems, play load, there are over like 3,000 papers in some areas, 5,000 in others. So since 1988, which is the year I was born, there has been near enough close to an exponential increase in the amount of research coming out. And one of the reasons for that is the improvement in technology and wearable devices, as we all know them now. And with any new technology, there's always going to be new research coming out. And part of my role here at Playermaker, having done research, and I think I've got about 20, 25 publications now, we want to be ensuring that we provide our customers and provide any future customers with unique insights to help them improve their athlete's performance, And now that might be to help from a physical point of view. One of the reasons why we chose it at Hull City, and a number of teams in the UK are currently trying the system, so it's because of the ability to help the multidisciplinary team. When coaches see it, it actually creates better conversation. And I think the first presentation that Daniel did mention about trying to have that holistic approach to training and match play. So we want to be able to look at everything to support the coaching model. We can't look at everything, but the more bits that we can actually help coaches with, and as a support network, help the coaches to help the players, to help the medical staff, that is our aim and objective. Ultimately, we are one team. We all want the same thing. We should not be fighting, but having technical and physical data together with information that can help the video analyst to create and save them time. For me, that's a really good insight. And because it's valid and reliable data, as we can see here through some of the information collected through one of my postgraduate students, we're very confident in the data. And because of that, we can then take it into a training environment. So this is an example of a daily training report from what we're doing at Hull City. And you can see here, we look at touches, releases, and one-touch releases. we would sometimes change one-touch releases for the time spent on the ball, so the average amount of time spent. And the reason for that is because we know that physically some of our players are capable of being able to run, move fast. Okay, we have that on the second page of the report. The coaches are more interested in this. So to engage them with the physical data, we actually see that the technical information is helping those communication lines better. And in order to look at and give perspective, we can provide the context of, okay, which players are the highest, left foot versus right foot players, how are they using their feet? And also looking at that 4-weekly cycle about how our average touches. So if we have an increase, okay, and decrease, let's build up progressively again. Maybe too big a jump. Does that matter with technical actions? We're not sure, we're still investigating. And what we want to be able to do is identify which ones are goalkeepers and which ones are doing rehab and how do they compare. So really simple report, a visual that allows the coaching staff to engage with the training information. Okay, why is this player taking the most touches? Well, actually, he didn't really move and the players kept passing to him. Okay, he's the best player on the pitch. He's like the Lionel Messi. Although actually there is no such player like Lionel Messi at Hull City. We have only ever had one Brazilian player at Hull City and called Giovanni, and he is a club legend. So even though despite Neymar, that video being shown earlier, I will forget that because Brazil supplied Giovanni to Hull City as well. So we have a lot of information. Now, the way that future monitoring perspective is going, we have this information and we want to be able to utilize it to help us with reduction of injury risk and improving performance. And some of the things that we've been able to use in a laboratory, like your time motion capture systems, your force platforms, we want to be able to bring that from the lab into the field. If we can actually do testing for players while they're in the field, so you don't have to test them in the lab, that's a win-win. Ultimately, we can test while they're playing football. And looking at this running cycle and the change in gait, so this was a research paper done by Katie Small and colleagues in 2008, and it basically showed that there was an increase in change in the knee extension, the hip extension, around the sprint mechanics when players were at risk of hamstring injury. So under fatigue, that's how they changed, and that caused greater increased risk towards hamstring muscle groups. And what we want to try and help find is actually provide useful information in order to bring this to life. Now, this case study is actually using a remote solution with some of the UK teams. So we sent Playermaker devices to players when they're at home. The data came up to the cloud. So during the COVID situation, we can monitor their athletes. And this was on the 2nd of April. So one of my former players, and I was working with the team, and the red line is total distance covered. The blue line is the contact duration. So how much time when there's heel strike to then push off, how much time the foot is in contact. So in a lab, for example, during drop jumps, your reactive strength index, we use contact duration for that. So the blue line is looking at left versus right foot. If it was a positive number, it would be a left bias. Negative number is a right bias, just to give context. This player, 2 weeks before this session, had recovered from a calf injury. And what you see is if we monitored him fine, this exercise was 6 sets of 2-minute running, 1 minute rest. You run as far as you can in the 2 minutes each time. As you can see, he is not the fittest of players. He's a centre-back. Like, centre-backs can be fit, by the way. And we see here actually a change in his mechanics throughout the session. So even though he's covering the same distance, through the new gait analysis that we have introduced, aka bringing the lab to the field, we can actually see now there was a change in his contact duration of his right leg by over 13%. And unfortunately for him, the following day, he picked up not one calf injury, a reoccurrence of the left, but he also had to pull out of training because of a right calf injury as well. Because he's overloaded both calves, he's compensated by not using his left as much and then use his right too much. So bringing that lab monitoring to the field from a physical point of view is where we are trying to take research. We're trying to help practitioners like yourselves to bring this information to life. And I've just literally been having text messages about a player who has a grade 3 quad injury, and his flight time is showing over 16% symmetry through running drills in his rehab. So we are now going to be discussing that as well. So there's a lot of examples coming in because of this new useful data that we have been used to in the lab, but now we can take to the field. And in line with that, we also have the ability to measure a strength power measure in the release velocity. So we actually profiled each one of our players within training sessions, looking at the left versus the right foot for maximum release velocity. Again, the previous presentation talked about players being able to use both legs, ambidextrous players. And we thought, okay, each player will have a dominant leg, each player will have a non-dominant leg. The dominant leg should be the stronger one, non-dominant, the weaker one. We didn't see that. So there was 1, 2, 3, 4 players who left and right foot was pretty even. And this was the same throughout all positions. The only thing anecdotally, so what we could tell, was that people that had the biggest differences were actually players who had a previous injury history. So for example, 1, 2, 3 players all had knee and hip previous injuries. And historically, they'd had not just one, but multiple. So you can see that we can actually get some interesting insights here. And a lot of the clubs in the UK and Europe now, we're investigating this kind of technical loading score and actually trying to identify, we get some soft tissue injuries through kicking mechanics. So how can we start to measure them, but also help performance? Ultimately, if you're a striker and you can kick the ball harder and it's on target, the keeper has less chance of saving the ball. So we want to be able to try and look at it from, again, performance enhancement, injury reduction strategies. And this has led us to, within academy football, for example, and I'll just try and reduce this. So again, we have the passing networks, and we want to try and look at when we are in bio-banding sessions. So when we put the early maturing players with the late maturing players, how does that affect the training sessions? And also when we then mix them, how does that affect it? So we actually did a study, 4v4 small-sided games, looked at the physical, looked at the technical, looked at the psychological, and we also looked at the coach's ratings. So we got the coach to pick the best players. And in most of these sessions, the coaches picked the early maturing players as who was the best player in that session, but on average they picked the late maturing player as the one with the most potential, which was really interesting. And from an RPE point of view, funnily enough, the late maturing players found it harder than the early maturing players. Despite even on bigger pitches, there wasn't that much difference. But what we did see as well from the amount of time spent on the ball, we actually saw that early maturing players got more time on the ball than less maturing players. And this threw up 2 questions. I spoke to quite a few head of coachings within the academy around this concept. And you think, so early maturing players get more touches, more time on the ball, and they have longer to make decisions, which again was mentioned in the previous topics. So actually, late maturers having to get less time on the ball, less touches, and they, on average, don't spend as much time on the ball. So they have to play it quicker. So does that actually help their decision-making skills from an early age? Because they don't want to get hit by the big kids. And that's something now that at the professional level, like we're trying to use it even with it in the elite level. So at Hull, and again, there's out of the teams that are using the Premier League, there are definitely 2 who have implemented like individual development plans for players as part of this. So at Hull, we had one player who was double the amount of time spent on the ball compared to anyone else in his position. So a centre midfielder, constantly getting tackled, constantly losing the ball. So we put an individual plan with the coaching staff, not physical, but technical, speed of reaction, little goals everywhere, little targets, 2-touch, receive the ball, play it quickly, react to a different stimulus. So trying to challenge his decision-making skills. And while we have a focus on physical side of it, actually this just opened our eyes to a bit more of the technical and decision-making skill aspects. And I think one of the important things that we found was we were conscious about getting information overload. I had some coaching staff over the last 4 to 5 years, including the likes of Marco Silva, a famous Portuguese coach, when we were in the Premier League. Sometimes we actually didn't even use real time. So because we were providing information afterwards, and he didn't want the players to actually see it because they were reliant upon that data. Now, for us as backroom staff, okay, we'd use the real time sometimes, but majority of the times it would be a distraction. And over in the UK and Europe now, it's probably less reliant upon, because if you plan properly and using the information smartly that you have, you shouldn't need to use real time. So it's kind of gone full circle where as soon as real time was available, we were like, okay, we can use it, we can change our session. Like, oh, stop there. Whereas now we're like, why do you need to stop the session? Keep going. Work the players hard. Challenge them. This is where they're challenging themselves mentally. What we have planned is a good session. So let's not interrupt them. Let's not distract the coaches, because ultimately, like, if the coach needs 10 more minutes to work on his tactical strategy to win a game of football, who am I as a sports scientist to say you shouldn't do 10 minutes more? Like, it might affect it, but I also think that with the information we can provide after the session and review, if you plan properly, you shouldn't need real time. And that's something that's really been key for me over the last years, is I've gone from wanting real time, using real time, testing it, validated, reliable, to now actually prescription is the way forward. And that's happening a lot within coaches. Can you, again, Marco Silva, I've named someone like Pep Guardiola, Jose Mourinho, top coaches in the UK and Europe. Are they using real time to control their sessions? Probably not. They are reliant upon good prescription, good planning, then inform. And thank you for listening. I appreciate your time, and thank you to Tiago, Ivan, Bruno, and all the speakers as well.